A transmission shop in Ohio billed a customer $2,200 last month for a habit he'd done every day for 6 years without knowing it. 9 habits like it are quietly wrecking manual transmissions everywhere, and you were probably taught to do at least one of them. A clutch job alone can run past $1,000, and a full transmission replacement can cost more than some of these cars are worth. I'm Jack, 30 years a mechanic, and I run my own shop in Ohio. And these 9 habits are the ones that kill clutches and gearboxes fastest. Number 9. Resting your foot on the clutch pedal while you drive. You don't press it down. You just let it hang there, heel on the floor, toes barely touching. Feels harmless. It isn't. Even a few pounds of pressure is enough to partially release the pressure plate, which means the throwout bearing is spinning under load the entire time your foot sits there, not just during a shift, but for the whole drive. That bearing is built to spin for seconds at a time, a few times a minute. Instead, it's spinning continuously for hours, every single day. Here's what that costs you. A clutch kit, disc, pressure plate, throwout bearing runs anywhere from $400 to $800 in parts on most cars. Labor to pull the transmission and put it back adds another $500 to $1,000 because on most front-wheel drive cars, the whole subframe has to come down to get to it. Ride the clutch long enough and you're not just replacing a worn disc early, you're grinding away friction material that should have lasted 100,000 miles in a third of that. I had a guy come in 2 years ago, mid-30s, new commute, new habit he didn't even notice he'd picked up. 38,000 miles on the car. I pulled the transmission expecting a normal checkup and found a clutch disc worn down to the rivets, like the car had 120,000 miles on it, and a throwout bearing so far gone it was rattling before I even had the housing apart. He never rode the clutch on purpose. He just always kept his foot resting there at a red light, at every stop sign, on every highway cruise. The fix costs you nothing. Keep your foot flat on the floor when you're not actively shifting or fully disengaging the clutch to stop. That's it. No resting weight on it. No, just a little pressure. Your left foot's job is binary, all the way down or all the way up, off to the side, resting on the dead pedal. Nothing in between. Quick word before we keep going. Everything like what you just heard. The habits, the intervals, the stuff I've used for 30 years, I put in a book at my website, jackcartermanual.com. I won't keep interrupting the video with it. If you want it, it's there. Now number 8. Number 8. Resting your hand on the shift knob between gears. This one surprises people every time I bring it up, because it feels like the opposite of a mistake, keeping a hand near the shifter so you're ready for the next change. But that shifter is connected, through linkage or cables, to a set of forks inside the transmission that slide the collars in and out of gear. Even light, constant pressure from your palm gets transmitted down that linkage and onto the fork pads, the parts that actually touch the spinning collar. Those pads are usually a softer material, brass, nylon, or a similar alloy, designed to wear against the collar during a shift, not to be leaned on for the entire length of a drive. Replacing worn shift forks isn't a 5-minute job. On most manual transmissions, it means dropping the whole gearbox out of the car to open the case. Parts alone run $200 to $400 depending on the vehicle, but labor to pull and reinstall a transmission is where it adds up. Often $800 to $1,500 once you include reassembly and fluid. I've seen this pattern across a lot of cars that never got driven hard. A salesman who logged 60,000 miles a year, mostly highway, brought his car in with a vague complaint that third and fourth gear felt notchy, like the shifter had to hunt a little before it engaged. I pulled the transmission expecting driveline wear from towing or hard driving, and instead found grooved, thinned-out fork pads, classic sign of a hand parked on the knob for years, applying a light sideways load hour after hour, every commute, every long haul. The fix is simple, and it costs you nothing but a habit change. Keep your hand on the wheel between shifts. Move it to the shifter only when you're actually changing gears. Complete the shift and bring it back. Your transmission was engineered for quick, deliberate inputs, not a passenger resting there for the whole drive. Number 7. Holding the car on a hill by slipping the clutch instead of using the brake. You're stopped at a light on an incline. Instead of using your foot brake, you balance the car in place by feathering the clutch just enough to keep it from rolling back. It feels smooth. It feels like control. What it actually does is turn your clutch disc into a heat generator because you're deliberately keeping it in that half-engaged slip zone where the disc and the flywheel are grinding against each other without ever fully locking. A clutch disc can handle brief slip during a normal launch from a stop. That's what it's designed for. What it can't handle is minutes at a time at every red light on every hill day after day. The friction material glazes over from the heat, which means it stops gripping properly even when you do fully engage it, and that heat transfers straight into the flywheel and pressure plate. A glazed clutch usually needs full replacement, and if the flywheel picked up hot spots or warping, it needs resurfacing or replacement too. Another $150 to $300 in parts on top of the clutch job itself. I had a delivery driver who worked a hilly route on the east side of town bring his truck in, complaining about a burning smell every afternoon. Pop the hood, and you could smell it before you even got close, that sharp, hot, almost electrical smell of a friction surface that's been cooking. He'd been holding position at every single stop sign on his route by riding the clutch, dozens of times a day for months. By the time he got to me, the disc was glazed and slipping under normal acceleration, not just on hills. The fix takes 1 second longer than what you're doing now. Use your foot brake to hold the car in place. When you're ready to go, bring the clutch up to the bite point, add a little throttle, and only then release the brake. It's called a proper hill start, and it uses your brakes, a part designed to absorb friction and heat all day long, instead of your clutch, which isn't. Number 6, coasting in neutral to save on gas. This one comes from good intentions and bad information. The idea is that if the engine isn't connected to the wheels, it's not working as hard, so you're burning less fuel going downhill or coasting up to a stop. On a fuel-injected manual, which is every manual on the road for the last 30-plus years, that's backwards. When you're in gear and you lift off the throttle, the computer cuts fuel entirely because the wheels are spinning the engine and it doesn't need any. Coast in neutral instead, and the engine drops to idle, which means it's back to burning fuel, just to keep running. You save nothing. You actually burn a little more. What you lose is engine braking, and that's the expensive part. Take your foot off the gas in gear on a long downhill grade, and the engine itself slows the car down, which means your brakes barely have to work. Coast that same hill in neutral, and your brakes are doing all of the work, the entire way down, building heat with nothing to relieve it. Do that on every long grade for years, and you're looking at premature pad and rotor wear, often a full brake job, front and rear, well before it should be needed. Easily $400 to $800 in avoidable repairs. I've seen this pattern in trade-ins that came from hillier parts of the state. Customers who swore by coasting in neutral to save gas, and every one of them had thinner brake pads and more scored rotors than a car with that mileage should ever have. It's a documented pattern owners report on long-grade routes everywhere, not just something I've noticed in my own shop. The fix is to stop fighting your own engine. Leave it in gear going downhill, let engine braking do the work it's built to do, and save your actual brakes for actual stopping. You'll use less fuel and less brake pad, not more. Number 5, and this is the one I'd put money on being the most expensive mistake on this whole list for the average driver. Rushing your shifts without fully pressing the clutch to the floor. In a hurry, people get lazy with that last inch of clutch travel. They press it most of the way down, throw the shifter into the next gear, and let the clutch back up while it's still not fully disengaged. Every manual transmission uses synchronizer rings to match the speed of the gear you're moving into before the dog teeth lock together. Those synchros can handle a normal shift just fine. What wears them out fast is doing that job over and over while the clutch is still partially engaged, feeding rotational energy into a gear the synchro is trying to slow down or speed up on its own. The result, over time, is a transmission that starts grinding into second gear or hesitating going into third long before it should. Once synchros wear down, the fix isn't a $5 part, it's an internal transmission rebuild or a used replacement unit, and on most cars that's $1,500 to $3,000 once labor's included. I had a landscaping company bring in 3 work trucks over one summer. Different drivers, same complaint. Hard to find second gear, especially cold. All 3 had the same habit. Quick half-clutch shifts because they were in and out of the truck constantly and never took the extra half second to fully depress the pedal. By 60,000 miles, all 3 needed synchro work in second gear specifically, the gear they used hardest getting in and out of job sites. The fix costs you nothing but half a second per shift. Push the clutch pedal all the way to the floor every time before you move the shifter. Let the synchros do their job instead of forcing the gear to match speed while you're still partially connected to the engine. That's 1 habit out of 101. Every one of them, laid out so you never have to guess an interval again, 101 habits to get your car past 500,000 miles, even if you've never opened a hood. It's all in my book at jackcartermanual.com, and it costs less than 1 hour of my labor. All right, back to the countdown. Number 4, downshifting hard for engine braking without matching the revs first. Some drivers like to slow down by dropping 2 or 3 gears instead of using the brakes, which isn't a bad instinct on its own. Real engine braking is useful, especially coming down a long grade. The mistake is dropping into that lower gear at highway speed without blipping the throttle to bring the engine speed up to match first. Do that, and when you release the clutch, you're forcing the engine to instantly match a much higher RPM than it was running, all at once, through the clutch and the whole drivetrain. On an older or high-mileage engine, that shock can be enough to cause valve float, or, in the worst cases, bend a valve outright if the RPM spike is severe enough. What guys in the shop call a money shift, because it turns a routine slowdown into an engine-out repair. On any car, it's a hard shock through the clutch, the flywheel, the drive shaft, and the differential, all designed for smooth power delivery, not sudden mismatched loads. A bent valve repair on an interference engine means pulling the head, and that's a bill that starts around $1,500 and climbs fast depending on how much damage the piston did to the valve on the way past. I had a younger driver bring in a car that had run fine that morning and was making a knock by afternoon. He downshifted hard off the highway into second gear to slow for an exit. No throttle blip, no rev match, just clutch in, yank the shifter, clutch out. The tash needle didn't have time to catch up before the drivetrain forced it there anyway. Compression test showed a dead cylinder. Head came off, and there was the bent valve, right where the piston had met it. The fix is called rev matching, and it's not complicated. Before you release the clutch on a downshift, blip the throttle to bring the engine speed up close to what it'll need to be in the lower gear. It takes practice to get smooth, but even a rough attempt is safer than none at all. If you're not confident doing it, use your brakes to slow down first, then downshift once your speed already matches the gear. Number 3, lugging the engine, driving in too high a gear at too low an RPM under load. This is the habit of short shifting into a high gear early to seem fuel efficient or relaxed, and then staying there even when you're climbing a grade, towing, or carrying a heavy load with the engine turning at a crawl. It feels smooth and quiet. Internally, it's the opposite of smooth. Low RPM under high load means each piston stroke has to generate a lot of force to keep the car moving, which spikes cylinder pressure and puts heavy stress on the connecting rods and rod bearings with every single combustion event. It also increases the odds of knock, the engine detonating unevenly, which hammers those same parts even harder. Rod bearing damage from chronic lugging doesn't show up right away. It shows up as a knock that gets louder over weeks or months, and by the time you hear it, the bearings are usually already scored. That's an engine-out job to fix properly. Pull the oil pan or the whole engine depending on the vehicle, replace the bearings, and hope the crankshaft itself wasn't damaged in the process. You're looking at $1,000 to $2,500 if you catch it early, and a full engine replacement, $4,000 to $8,000 if you don't. I've had more than one farmer and more than one contractor bring in a truck with exactly this complaint, a low knock that shows up specifically when towing or hauling, quiet otherwise. Same pattern every time, driving in too high a gear at low RPM because it felt more relaxed, right up until the load made the engine work too hard to handle it safely at that speed. The fix is to listen to the load, not the tachometer's comfort zone. If the engine sounds like it's straining, if you feel it lugging or shuddering slightly under acceleration, downshift. Keep the RPM up in the range where the engine actually makes usable torque, especially towing, climbing, or carrying weight. A slightly louder engine for 30 seconds is a lot cheaper than a rod bearing job. Number 2, ignoring your clutch's hydraulic system, the fluid, the master cylinder, the slave cylinder, until it fails on you without warning. Most modern manual cars use a hydraulic clutch, the same basic principle as your brakes. Fluid transmits the pressure from your foot to the clutch fork. That fluid needs to be flushed and replaced on a schedule, same as brake fluid, because it absorbs moisture over time and that moisture corrodes the seals in the master and slave cylinders from the inside. Most owners never touch it because nobody tells them to, and there's no dashboard light for it like there is for an oil change. Here's the part that catches people off guard. When that hydraulic system fails, it usually doesn't fail gradually. The pedal doesn't get progressively harder to push over months. It goes soft, and then the clutch pedal drops straight to the floor with no resistance at all, sometimes right in the middle of traffic, because a corroded seal finally lets go all at once. At that point, you can't shift, and depending on what gear you were in when it happened, you may not be able to move the car at all. That's a tow bill on top of the repair, and the repair itself, master and slave cylinder replacement, usually runs $300 to $700 in parts and labor, more if the fluid contamination damaged other components downstream. I had a customer stranded on the highway shoulder, called the shop in a bit of a panic because the clutch pedal had just gone straight to the floor with a light rain coming down and rush hour traffic streaming past him. 10 years on that car, and as far as he could remember, the clutch fluid had never once been changed. When we got it in, the fluid looked like weak coffee, full of moisture and corrosion byproduct that had been slowly eating at the seals the whole time. The fix is exactly what it is for your brakes. Flush the clutch hydraulic fluid on the interval your manufacturer sets, usually every 2 years or so, and have someone inspect the lines and cylinders for weeping fluid at every service. It's a cheap, boring maintenance item that prevents an expensive, sudden, embarrassing failure. And number 1, the mistake that costs more than every other habit on this list combined, because it's the one that turns a repair into a total loss. Continuing to drive through a transmission that's already telling you something's wrong, hard shifts, grinding into a specific gear, a gear that suddenly won't engage at all, instead of getting it looked at the moment you notice it. By the time a transmission starts grinding or refusing a gear, something inside is already worn past where it should be, usually a synchronizer that's given up. Keep driving through that grinding, forcing the shifter into the gear anyway, and you're not just wearing down that one synchro further. You're often shearing metal off the dog teeth and the collar with every force shift, and those metal shavings don't just sit in one spot. They circulate through the whole gearbox and the transmission fluid, working their way into every other gear, every bearing, every other synchro in the case. What started as a single bad gear becomes a transmission that's contaminated and failing everywhere at once. At that point, you're not buying a synchro repair anymore, you're buying a full transmission rebuild or a replacement unit. And on most vehicles, that's $3,000 to $6,000 once labor's included, on some cars close to what the car itself is worth on the used market. A problem that would have cost $400 to $600 to catch early turns into a bill that can total the car. I had a case a few years back that stuck with me since a customer who'd been feeling second gear get harder and harder to find for months, chalked it up to just how the car shifts now, and kept driving it that way because it still technically worked. It finally let go on the highway, and by the time it came into my bay, there was metal in the fluid, scoring in gears that had nothing to do with second, and a transmission that was done completely, all because a warning that started small got ignored for months instead of days. That's the same reason my old truck's still shifting smooth past 780,000 miles. The day gears got hard to find. That's the day I fixed it, not drove through it. The fix is simple, and it's the most important one on this whole list. The moment a shift feels wrong, hesitant, grinding, refusing to go in, stop driving on it and get it looked at. Don't wait for it to get worse. Don't assume it'll sort itself out. A transmission problem caught early is a repair. A transmission problem you drive through for months is a replacement. Every one of these 9 habits does the same thing in the end. It turns a small, avoidable wear pattern into a bill that didn't have to happen. The clutch, the synchros, the shift forks, none of them are trying to fail on you. They're just responding, exactly the way metal and friction material always respond to whatever you ask of them every single day. Every habit that kept my truck alive past 780,000 miles is in the book at jackcartermanual.com. Go grab it. So tell me, which one of these did you get taught to do, and by who? I'm Jack. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.